I guess we'll just get going here with some housekeeping items. If everyone could just keep their mics off while we're going through the presentations, that would be great. We'll have time for some questions and stuff at the end where you can unmute yourself and ask some questions to the presenters. Also, another really important thing for the pesticide points is that everyone's name is displayed correctly. So there may be a couple people on that it says iPad or iPhone. If you can just change your name or at least type in the comments who you are, just so that we can keep track of who's present for the pesticide points, that would be great. And for the pesticide points, in order to be counted as present, you have to be here for the entirety of the session. So each session you can see on the schedule that was sent out with the link is either half a point or 1 point. So you just have to stay from 10 to 10:30 to get that half a point, and then 10:30 to 11 to get the other half point. Yeah, and then we'll just post the CCA points at the very end for those of you who are certified crop advisors. Yeah, and then we'll just do a quick little kind of blurb on us as the Agromart and the things that we offer. All right, so we have a pretty great team of certified crop advisors and also support staff based in Truro and Falmouth. So we cover a fairly wide area, and we have a pretty dedicated salesperson to Newfoundland as well. So we're pretty much available all over. So here's just, if you're not familiar with some of the names of our team, so we have Alana Bent. She's currently on maternity leave, but that's her contact. Allison Bremner, Mel Bent, Nick Juurlink, and then we have a really great team of summer students that we're hoping come back for this season to join us. So any of those people, if you're kind of based in the valley, looking for hort or field crop advice, you can reach out to any of those folks. For our Truro team, kind of based here, is myself, Donnie McGregor, Luke Fisher, Rebecca Archibald, and Terry Prescott. So if you're looking for any help kind of in the Truro surrounding areas, Antigonish, feel free to reach out to any of us. So as far as kind of just an update on some products and services that we offer, so we do custom fertilizer blends based on soil tests, sap analysis, all that kind of stuff. We also carry a great line of Agricale foliar nutrients, which can be applied based off of sap samples. We also do water-soluble nutrients for anything kind of going through drip lines, and then crop protection, so herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, all that kind of stuff. Seed, we carry decal varieties of corn and beans, and also Enogen corn, as well as quality seed forage. And for farm supplies, that's all of your typical plastic, twine. We do also carry fairly new, in the past couple of years, is a fairly heavy duty rat poison. So we've got a good lineup of different rat poisons that we can help you pick depending on if you've got a bad rat problem. Yeah, and also salt through the winter kind of is what keeps us going through the winter. And here's just some nice pictures of us kind of doing some trials in the field. This is a picture of a couple of us doing sap samples in a low bush blueberry field. Not the best one to do sap samples. The leaves are quite small. For services offered, like I had said before, we can do sap and fruit sampling. The sap samples are sent to the Netherlands for analysis. The fruit samples are sent to A&L labs in Ontario. Soil sampling, we can do those, and those are all sent to the lab here in Nova Scotia. And then based on the results that come back from all those tests, we have a great team of certified crop advisors that can make recommendations based on those results. All right. And so we have started doing this in the past couple of years, just doing a pre-season planning. So the idea is that we do it kind of now, January, February timing. Uh, Everyone's kind of ready to get going, but there's not a huge rush to get things done right away. So it gives all the advisors lots of time to kind of make really good plans based off of your soil samples that you may have done in the fall. SAP samples, just kind of analyzing how they had gone last year, any changes that we need to make. We can come up with granular fertilizer plans, all that kind of stuff. So it's best to do it now, just to kind of have a plan going into the season when we have lots of time to sit down and just make a solid plan. It's also a really good time to look at your fungicide, insecticide programs that you had been using in the past. PMRA changes things very often. So just because you had used it last year doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be able to use it this year. Also, there could be newer, better products for the pests that you're trying to fight. So it's always a good idea to kind of help us let you look through your fungicide insecticide plans. Also, it's really important for resistant management to kind of keep those products changing and not to kind of keep doing the same thing year over year or using one product too much kind of thing. Yeah, and here's just some pictures of our trucks that Rebecca and I kind of coordinate through the year to get fertilizer, seed, everything else out. So I will let Rebecca take over from here and do the third-party financing update. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so thanks to Chloe for kicking us off this morning. Just a little bit about third-party financing. We do have a couple programs here through the Agromart, so it's more or less just a tool for you guys and for us to help with cash flow and cut down on interest charges. So we do have a program through Farm Credit Canada. It's called the Crop Input Loan. Some of you may already be familiar with it. Scotiabank does one as well. Their program is called Yield More Financing. So both of them are kind of designed so that, for example, all your 2025 season purchases coming up this year in the spring and summer will be put onto this loan. And then you have until February, the end of February, to pay off the Scotiabank program, and with the FCC one, it's the middle of March, the payment deadline. So with both of these programs, the interest rate is right around prime plus 2.95. So it can just prove to be, like I said, a tool to help you with your cash flow and cut down on interest charges that you'd be getting if you left a balance in-house with us here that long. We've used these for quite a few years now. We have quite a few customers that are on it. We do try to get a lot of our new customers just sign directly right up on this program. Gives a bit of flexibility on both sides, and they are great to work with. They're easy to disperse the funds. It's all done online, of course, and I can do that here in the office, or on the payment side of things, the payment can come either through us, or you can pay directly online to your loan yourself, which is also kind of nice. You can access all that information in the customer portal side of things. So if anyone has any questions about those programs or interested in learning a bit more, certainly reach out to myself or anyone here at some point after the meetings, and we would be happy to talk about those further. So that kind of wraps up what we have, just as a brief overview of what we're up to and what you can find us doing throughout the year. Just our contact information there on the screen. If you do want to get a hold of us for anything, you can always follow us on social media, and we're always happy to chat. So looking forward to the day today, and we have blueberry sessions this evening, and another full day tomorrow and evening tomorrow night as well with blueberry sessions. So looking forward to the great lineup of presenters. we'll just take a couple minutes here and get ready for our first speaker of the morning.
Okay, so can you guys hear me now? I'm just gonna wait for Chloe to respond to that. Okay, she's all good. So we're all here for pesticide points. That's the #1 goal of the day. We all realize that you're not here to see my beautiful face. So Allison had asked me to do a presentation, kind of bringing home why mycotoxins, kind of our important effects of them, why we need to concentrate on them. So I'm going to get started going through the presentation, and I'm going to try and bring this all together so it kind of makes sense. Or not. Hmm. Okay. So just for our agenda, we're going to go through the introduction, the toxins, Western bean cutworm, and corn earworm. I'm going to assimilate most of our toxicity or mycotoxins that we see will be due to an infection point. So we're going to go over, of course, the spraying options for that, both on the insecticide side and on the fungicide side. Then we'll go through some traits and then we'll try and understand the inoculants and binders, just in case we do have some issues. There's a course moving forward. So yeah, my name's Nick. I've been at the Agromart for I think 12 years now. I kind of bounce between the Annapolis Valley and Truro. So if anybody doesn't know me, they can always reach out. We can make a time to meet up and go over a plan. So toxins are really, I'm going to call them weather and season related. So in order to have a toxin, we can have an infection period in certain years, and because that year is quite dry, we won't see a mass accumulation of toxins. We should be preventative on the toxins, so that includes a spray program for insecticides and fungicides. But if we do get into a dry year, we will see less incidence of mycotoxins in our crops. On a wet year, like 2 years ago, the incidence is quite high. So this is a slide from Mike Hutchins, just going over the toxin levels that he's looking out for. So we're okay if we're less than these numbers. And there's a couple different toxins listed here. I don't think it's important to get into the weeds on which toxins are that you're going to have. Basically, once you have an infection point, you are going to have susceptibility to those toxins. So if we keep it fairly simple, we'll just try and understand, how this is happening and what we can do about it. So this is one of my feed samples. This isn't this year, this is last year. So this field was actually underwater in the floods of July in 23. We were lucky that the aflatoxins were not high in this crop, but the deoxyribonural and zearalenone were positive. So we could see those toxins in the crop when we were out scouting it. We had a fairly good indication that we were going to have toxins that year. So, how can we move forward understanding that we do have an issue? So that was the corn silage sample. The corn silage is diluted with the stalk of the crop. The toxin is mainly coming out of the cob. We'll see a higher level on just a pure grain sample. So If we're combining that corn and sending it to the dryer, we have to understand that that is going to increase the amount of toxin in the sample. This is just showing our TMR. So this kind of goes the other way. We were diluting that corn silage in our TMR. So you can see we still have positive results, but they are much lower than the initial corn silage results. Once we have that established, that we have that in the crop, then we have to figure out how we can prevent that from growing or moving forward. So I'm going to assimilate most of the infection periods that we would see would come from an insect. So Western bean cutworm probably moved into the province 5 or 6 years ago. And you'll see this traditionally with a small bullet hole exit wound from the side of the cob. So when we're out scouting, that's really that's how we tell that we've missed our period where we could have sprayed if we're seeing that bullet hole on the side of the cob at that point. So this is just some IDs. We're really looking at that Western bean cutworm larvae. So you'll see that in the second picture there. That's what's doing the damage. So we'll monitor this. We'll look for the pests coming in. We'll know that we have them, but the damage is actually caused by that cutworm larvae. So these are just the traps. You'll see these around, and we were doing a monitoring program with Perennia in the past. And we would see the flights and peak flight times. Not always was that correlating with major damage and infestation of mycotoxins. So it's just important to understand that they are flying. It depends on the vegetative stage of the corn, whether when they lay those egg masses, if that larvae can survive. So in order for us to get the points allocated to everybody, we've got to go through some of these scouting practices and some spray practices. So we're gonna scout fields 1 to 2 times a week in July and August, and then we're gonna count the egg masses. Egg masses are tremendously hard to find, so this sounds really easy, but what we're gonna do when we're counting egg masses is we're gonna walk through the fields. We're going to look up through the leaves and we're going to try and find, you'll see it, the egg mass from the bottom side, and you can just see a shadow of it, and that's what we're going to classify an egg mass. And we're going to take those egg masses cumulatively. So when they reach 5%, then we're going to say an insecticide application is warranted. So here's the vegetation stage that we're looking for. If you are finding those egg masses and there is no tassel, there's nothing for those larvae to feed on. So we don't have to be tremendously concerned about it. But what happens when that tassel comes out, then they have the pollen to feed on, and then they will move into the cob. So this is damage from the Western bean cutworm. This is really where our toxins are coming from. So those are the infection points. And again, on a wet year, with the husk over the cob, that's where those mycotoxins and toxins are growing. The other thing that we see here, besides Western bean cutworm, is a lot of corn earworm, and this is getting more and more prominent. We saw it maybe 8 years ago, and we thought that we had some issues, and we were assured that we didn't. But we continuously see corn earworm, and there is some resistance in Ontario found on corn earworm from our trait packages. So this is the thresholds that we're looking for spraying. It's kind of a hard slide to understand, but basically, if we're scouting and we're seeing 1 to 13 in our trap per day, then we're going to spray every 4 days to clear that corn earworm up. In all reality, we're not going to be able to get our machine in that often to do it, so we're gonna spray it when we have the opportunity to spray it with a Western bean cutworm spray, and we're probably going to try and throw a fungicide in the tank at the same time. So spraying products and rates. So we have the green check marks are for Western bean cutworm and corn earworm. So these are the products that we are allowed to use. So we have Coragen Max. We have a rate there from 83 to 125 milliliters per hectare. We have a timing and your re-entry and pre-harvest periods. Anything with 2 check marks will get both Western bean cutworm and corn earworm. So I just want you guys to understand that we can work together closely when we're scouting those fields to decide what the best chemistry is and when we're going to use that application. So should I spray? Shouldn't I spray? The economic threshold really depends on your ability to handle those mycotoxins. And so let's step back, go to that for a second. If we're feeding chickens and pigs, we have much smaller threshold for mycotoxins. So if you remember those original slides, there was a list there, and every different mycotoxin has a level that's acceptable for a different animal. And it's important to understand that if I'm putting that corn through hogs, I probably need to do a better job on my mycotoxins in my spray program. So if we're worried about this, we're going to say a 5% infestation rate, and it's a cumulative infestation. So if we go through and we see 2 egg masses the first day that we're scouting, and we see 3 egg masses after that, then we have a 5 egg masses, and if we're saying a 5% infection period, then it's time to spray. So if we're going to spray for the prevention of mycotoxins, we're going to do that at R1. So we're going to use an insecticide and a fungicide at the same time. So the purpose of this is to get control or try and knock down that population of the Western bean cutworm at that time. And we're going to carry that timing works really well for that fungicide. So let's understand our fungicides. There's only certain fungicides that have suppression on Fusarium ear rot and Jabilla ear rot. So those are basically the rots that we're trying to prevent from forming after that infection period, or if there is an infection period. And that's a really good time to get that to flow down into that corn cob during pollination. So we're getting rid of our Western bean cutworm, and we're trying to get that fungicide to flow down in the R1 stage into the corn cob itself. So that's the spraying side of it. And the other side that we can look at is the trait side. So we have trait packages available on our seed corn, and everybody loves seed corn. When we're looking at Western bean cutworm resistant hybrids, we are looking at basically one trait package. So we offer that on the decal side and the Bayer side with a VIP 3A. We offer that on the Syngenta side with the Viptera package. In all reality, these are the same packages. So Syngenta came out with that VIP 3A, and then other companies are using that. It's a very effective trait. It works very well to control what we're asking it to control. There are some watch outs for it, so it doesn't get into the varieties very well in lower heat units. So we're really struggling to find varieties that work in our heat units with the VIP 3A trait in it, so the Viptera trait. Syngenta has some good ones on the NK side, and Bayer does as well. So it's not every variety that has it, but we do have selective varieties. So here's just a table that shows you the different traits. So we have the Vipteria and the Tricepta, and we're going to get that Western bean cutworm on both of those. So inoculants. So if we have an infection period, we didn't get it sprayed on time. We're looking at that field, we're scouting it, and we're seeing infection points, and we're seeing mold. The next thing that we can do is use an inoculant. So this is for corn silage or for high moisture corn. Basically, what we're trying to do is we're trying to speed up the fermentation. So this is another slide from Mycotoxins. It just shows that we are dropping that silage pH a lot faster when we are using an inoculation program. So it seems very simple. So this is just inoculants and corn silage. So we're dropping our pH farther. We're increasing our lactic acid, which works as a volatile fatty acid. So that is increasing the energy in the product. We're actually increasing our dry matter recovery. So if we just look at this, the math behind increasing our dry matter recovery by 3 or 4 points and increasing our digestibility by those 3 points, that's going to pay for that inoculant right out of the gate. We're going to try and use a homofermentative inoculant. They are the most efficient and usually the most cost efficient to use. So that would be our Magnesia Classic and the titanium inoculants. The titanium also has a lactobacillus in it as well. So this shows how fast we are dropping that pH. So the only difference between these two slides is the dry matter of the alfalfa silage. And you can see compared to the control, we're dropping over a half of a point. So this is the titanium inoculant. So what I'm trying to take away here is on day 3, we have a pH of 3.5. On the control at day 30, we only have a pH of 4. So we're dropping that pH faster. And that's helping to control some of those molds. So this is a titanium slide that just shows the amount of molds that we can drop by using that titanium product and that Buckneri in it as well. So if we didn't get an inoculant on our crop when we harvested it, the other thing I should say on that is the oxygen limiting barriers. So there is studies showing that by using an oxygen limiting barrier, you can drop that growth of the toxin in the silage pile while it's fermenting as well. But if we lost out on all those and we still don't have an inoculant on that corn crop or that corn silage crop, we can then use a binder. This basically just works as something to tie up that toxin. So most of them are clay-based bentonite. You can use a zeolite. The issue with these binders is that you can cause different effects on tying up minerals in your feeds as well. So I think it's just important to understand that, these are last ditch efforts to try and tie up mycotoxins. You're going to create more problems, or you could create more problems when you're feeding them. I wanted to talk about late season cattle blight here. So Allison and I still have our beef cows, and this is a major issue that we have. So this is due to a fencing issue. This cow calved in the cornfield, and we chased her for 3 days. We did get her out, but I just did want to make light of that. And the control for our cattle blight. So there's nothing like a good steak to control cattle blight. that is my presentation. And if we have any questions, we can go from there.
Yep, there was just one question. Which methods do you use to detect mycotoxin?
So we're putting that through Cumberland Labs to get a mycotoxin result on the corn silage. If we're looking at a standing crop, we're usually scouting it, and we'll pull back those ears. And if we're seeing molds in that crop, that's a pretty good indication that we're going to have a mycotoxin issue. They're pretty visible. Like, you'll pull that back, you'll see gibberella, ear rot, you'll see your pink fusariums. So I think, we can also send those out for a snap test, but we generally already know that we have an idea if we're out scouting those fields.
Well, good morning, everyone. Appreciate the invite to join you this morning. My name's Adam Pfeffer. I spoke to this group. I think it was last year, maybe it was
Just
2
wait
years.
2 more minutes just to kind of stay
Yeah.
on time here with the pesticide points. And yeah, I'll let you know when we're ready to go here. Just a couple minutes.
Okay, sounds good.
I'd say you can take it away, Adam. We're pretty close to time, so should be good.
Sounds good. You can hear me okay? Can you hear me, Chloe?
Yep, we can hear you, Adam.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Nick. So good morning, everyone. Appreciate the invite to chat with the group today. My
I
name's
don't know if we
Adam.
can hear you, Adam. There, okay.
We good? Give me a thumbs up. You can hear me, Chloe? Okay, thanks. So appreciate the time here this morning. I was asked to come and speak on a couple different bugs that are impacting the Maritimes. Yeah, we have a fair amount of experience with rootworm here in Ontario, Quebec, and certainly throughout the US. And then the second topic I'll touch on is European Corn Board and provide a bit of an update on what we're seeing in our scouting program the last couple seasons. So my role with Bayer is a technical product lead for corn and soybeans. So I cover all of Canada for those crops, all facets of them, from germplasm to traits to agronomy to crop protection, fungicides, herbicides, and agronomy. So I work with our market development team, product management group to bring our technology pipeline to the Canadian farmer. I farm here in southern Ontario, just south of London, so I do get my hands during the season as well. So from a corn rootworm standpoint, and the little bit of time I've spent in the Maritimes, you guys certainly have a bit of pressure. And corn rootworm is really associated with continuous corn production. I think, not unlike the US, lots of areas of Canada have areas where continuous corn livestock is very common. And really, from a Canadian perspective, it's really driven from a livestock standpoint. And certainly the Maritimes area, you guys have, your corn's really tightly associated with dairy production, as well. Apologies, I'm just gonna stop this presentation for a second. Shut this stupid thing off. See if that helps. You guys still see my screen here?
Yep, it looks good. You're kind of in, there. You're all good now.
Perfect. Yeah, sorry about that. It never fails. You start to present and a bunch of people start messaging you. So, yeah, so corn rootworm really associated with continuous corn production. In Canada, our continuous corn production is really tied to livestock. In Ontario here, Oxford, Huron, Perth, Grey counties, Oxford, north end of Middlesex, where we really see our heavy corn rootworm pressure. It's really tied to dairy and pig production. And I think what you guys are seeing in the Maritimes is really from keeping those cornfields in production for 2 or 3 or potentially longer. But once you rotate off corn, it really eliminates this pest, which is one unique thing about this pest. It is fairly easy to manage with crop rotation, unfortunately. Comparing that to the US, where there is major issues, I would say, with this pest, that continuous corn production is really driven from farmers, cash crop growers, just continuing. Well, their most profitable crop is corn, in those high production areas where they're 250, 300, 350 bushel yield environment. They certainly strive to grow corn year after year. So just a brief slide here on the life cycle. So the corn rootworm starts in the spring. Essentially, adults lay eggs in the fall. They'll overwinter in the soil. They'll try and burrow down, below the frost line, 4, 5, 6 inches, potentially up to a foot. And those eggs will hatch early in May. And once those eggs hatch, those larvae travel to the corn roots and start their feeding process. And it's really that larva that does the most amount of damage to the corn plant. And you really won't notice it happening unless you're out there digging plants up closer to tassel time. And I'll touch a little bit around scouting and how to identify this pest and if you have some challenges with it. But it's really that larval feeding from middle of May right through the end of July. Typically, they'll go through 2 or 3 instar stages. They'll pupate and then they'll come out as adults. And you'll have male and female adults flying around in the canopy. And if you're in the field through August, you'll typically find those adults feeding on silks, I guess frolicking, for the lack of a better term, in the canopy. And they'll be mating and laying eggs typically back in that field. They don't generally range too far. If there is neighboring cornfields, they will travel up to 1 kilometer or 2. But typically those adults really lay eggs back in that field. And just a couple different species that we have here in Canada. This is a couple pictures from Jocelyn Smith at Ridgetown. On the left-hand side is northern corn rootworm. You'll see it's a very lime green color, typically a bit smaller and more elongated. And that one is, I would say, less so, or the smaller percentage of the population that we have here in Ontario. The right-hand side with western corn rootworm, you have those very distinctive black stripes. There are other beetles that look similar to the corn rootworm. But if you see these, and you'll see these end of July throughout August, really kind of when you start seeing all those bugs that light up at nighttime, name escapes me right now, fireflies, when you start seeing those flying around in the summertime, it's typically a similar window, at least for us here in Ontario, when these things start to come out after pupating. And their emergence can vary from a few weeks to a month, and they'll stay active in that crop canopy. And I know fields that have severe pressure here in Ontario, and when we get a call out to a PI situation, they'll be going through fungicide spray during tassel silk emergence time, and their machines will be covered in these adults. So There is a bit of a management practice in the US where they'll actually go in and spray these adults or try to spray them with an insecticide to reduce their populations. I would say there's not many, if any, farmer that I'm aware of here in our hotspots here in Southern Ontario that are adopting that practice. But again, it is a management practice that they try to use in the US to help under extreme pressure of this pest. And really what the concern with corn rootworm is the primary feeding again on the roots of the plants. And that really can lead to some significant challenges from nutrient uptake, water uptake, standability. And that's really the main above ground visual that you'll see is the goosenecking lodging after a windstorm later on in the season. But this picture here on the left, you can see this is from a product inquiry, small dairy farm in Southern Ontario, just northwest of London that I went to back in 2022. And this is a traded plant, a Smart Stacks Pro or Smart Stacks traded plant. And you can see I broke away the top brace roots here so you could see it a little bit better, but these main primary nodal roots are pretty much all chewed off within an inch and a half of the stalk. And this is extreme feeding, I would say. And in this particular situation, the soil was wet and we didn't require a shovel to pull these plants out of the ground. You could just go along and plunk them out of the ground. They really had next to no roots left on them. You know, the plant can recover, and the picture here on the right hand side shows that a little bit, where you can see this heavy area of feeding here, lots of dark necrotic tissue tunneling going on, but you can see a lot of nice fresh roots, root fibers coming out. So the plant can compensate provided that, you know, there's moisture there and lots of energy to keep growing through it. But again, removing those primary roots and that rooting system throughout that rapid growth and development phase really hampers from a yield standpoint as well. And you can have some fairly significant yield reductions with corn rootworm. Secondary feeding, and this is what you may observe a little bit earlier, a little bit easier as you're walking through your fields during the summer. We call this one on the left the window painting, where the beetle will actually just go along and scarify that leaf and feed on that tissue. You'll typically see the veins left, and you'll see this all over the plant. You know, you may think it's slug feeding, could easily be mistaken for slug feeding for sure, potentially some hail damage, but really when you get heavy beetle feeding, you can see leaf feeding like this. And then the other spots, similar to Japanese beetles, not sure if you guys are dealing with those out east or not, but they'll get into the silks where it's really juicy, lots of moisture, and they'll actually eat those silks right into the ear. And under extreme situations, they may reduce pollination, but that's very uncommon, I would say. Typically, they emerge after and get that feeding process started after pollination is finished. But again, if you're walking through your fields after tasseling or through that August timeframe, looking for what's going on in there from an insect standpoint, these would be two other very common things to see in your fields. And then once you get into the severe symptomology stage, you can see the picture here on the left is a field that I visited a few years ago up near Listowel, Ontario. You can see these plants are goosenecked, what we call goosenecking, where the roots are essentially chewed off and you have a windstorm or some kind of physical pushing event, and that plant will actually lean sideways, and then as it recovers and regrows, it'll basically form a hockey stick. So this is really when you get into, and you can see the pictures here on the right, essentially no roots left on these plants whatsoever. That's really when you get into significant yield loss, can have significant challenges from a silage harvest standpoint as well, not being able to pull those plants in. And for silage producers, dairy producers that we've visited, that's been the number one complaint. That, you know, they don't necessarily think about the grain yield impacts, but when they start seeing full plants or half plants laying flat on the ground and the Kemper head's not able to pick them up, that's when you can can get into some significant yield and tonnage losses there. So, you know, if you're seeing goosenecking symptomology, you know, typically it's easiest to find along field edges, where you're out in the open from a wind standpoint. But if you're in this scenario, you've got significant pest pressure and something to consider. Not consider rotating. I think you really just have to rotate once you get to this stage here. Then just a slide to give you an idea of how we rate these roots and the root damage. And really, yeah, yield loss is up to 45%. I think that really depends on the growing conditions after the feeding as well. If you have lots of moisture, again, good fertility, that'll really impact how those plants recover. But on the left-hand side here, this is a root that we would really consider very minor feeding, 0.05 on the node injury score. You know, the odd little bit of nibble, nothing too major there. The plant here on the left, on the second plant in here, at a 0.35. So this is really when we start to get into a resistance scenario or a very heavy population. And you'd see this common on biotech traits, you know, from our camp, from Pioneers Camp, pretty much all trait providers. Under heavy feeding, you can start to see damage like this. One thing with corn rootworm is it does need to feed to die. So you will see a bit of root feeding on those plants. Once you get into the 1.25, so this would be a full node of roots chewed off and a quarter of a second node. So you can see these dark areas, you know, these roots are really chewed off right to the base of that plant again, similar to the picture I shown before. This is really when you start to get into some significant yield impacts, you know, 15, 20, 25, 30+% from a grain yield, but also from a silage standpoint. And then once you get under extreme feeding, really, you know, if you're in a conventional or non-traded plant under super heavy pressure, once you get up into the high 2s or 3s, there's essentially no roots left on those plants. So it's a rating scale that is fairly clearly defined. And if you are concerned about corn rootworm in your field, if you're long-term continuous corn, you want to do some root digs into the summertime. Around that, well, we like to get into the field just before pollen shed, just because it's a little bit cleaner. Wash the roots off, and then you can see what kind of level of feeding that those larvae have done. And again, you can come into some fairly significant yield loss. This slide here is a couple years old, but gives you an idea of the distribution of our hotspots. I mentioned them a few times. This area north and west of London is really the core livestock area for southern Ontario. This area down by Chatham is continuous corn from a soil type, sandier soil down here. So growers typically like to grow continuous corn down in this neighborhood, and we do see some populations into eastern Ontario. And this past year, we had the first report of a resistance case in Quebec. So again, it really is tightly tied to livestock production. And this figure here is a map, excuse me, of southern Ontario, and we have similar maps we can pull up for the Maritime provinces as well. But you can see any orange fleck here is at least 3 years continuous corn. I mentioned the sand belt down here by Chatham is really grain corn production. But once you get up into this area, it's really driven on dairy and pig production. And then you can see eastern Ontario and southern Quebec is exceptionally high from a continuous corn standpoint. So another picture, just couple of last slides here. This is a field, a dairy farm, I believe in 2023. It was drier in this region during the season, and you can see this is all traded plant material, Smart Stacks traded material. And you can see all these plants are goosenecked, and with the soil on those plants, you can still see significant feeding. And looking at it closer here, you know, this plant is probably would rate around that 1.5 on the node injury score. And And just for reference, anything over a 0.5 on that scale is considered to be a product inquiry. So this field, this population has a strong appetite for traded material. And we did characterize or classify this one as a formal product inquiry. So I mentioned at the start, really with corn rootworm, if you're concerned about it, thinking through your crop rotations, it is really primarily driven or solely driven on continuous corn production. And fortunately, the best way to manage this pest is just rotate off corn. So if you're rotating between corn and small grains or hay, grass hay, if you can rotate after 3 years of corn, I think you're in a fairly safe situation for keeping populations under control. The other consideration is volunteer corn management, which for the density of silage production in the Maritimes, I don't think is a big concern because you're taking that whole plant before grain harvest. But if you're in that grain harvest scenario, managing volunteers the following year is important. But really with corn rootworm, the primary food source for developing larvae is corn plants. That's the only thing they can feed on. I mentioned that they can travel up to a couple miles. So if you have a neighborhood of continuous corn, those populations can bounce in between cornfields. So if you are seeing a challenge with this pest and you're concerned about it, do some root digs, and just have a look and think about your immediate neighborhood and how you can rotate those fields off of corn. And really one season rotation off virtually eliminates that pest, and then you can reset and get back into corn. So yeah, it's an interesting pest. I know there isn't as many corn hybrids in the excuse me, in the early maturities that have corn rootworm protection. I know everything from our portfolio, our earliest Smart Stacks based product, rootworm product, would be in that 85-day window, 83, 85 RM. So you guys don't have as many options to manage this pest, but again, rotation is really the number one agronomic practice that you can do to manage this pest. So Chloe, that was what I wanted to share on corn rootworm. Was there any questions on it, or I guess feedback from anybody in the audience today if you're dealing with this pest, if it is of concern, or if there's any specific questions before I jump over to European corn borer?
Does anyone have any questions for Adam regarding corn rootworm? If so, feel free to unmute yourself. You did. Sorry, Ed.
The show of hands, if anybody's seen adult corn rootworm larvae around. I know I have the last few summers that I've been out scouting.
You quickly mentioned something about a Japanese beetle. Do you guys have a lot of problem with Japanese beetle in corn?
I would say they're still in the cosmetic stage, but I will say that Japanese beetles, at least in my geography south of London here, do seem like they're gaining in density. Where I have seen them in a corn canopy similar to corn rootworm is they'll get after the silks and prune them right down. They'll get into the kernels on the end of the ear. They're nice and juicy. I would say they're more of a cosmetic pest. In soybeans, they can defoliate, but it takes a fair amount of defoliation to cause any kind of yield impact. I don't know of anybody that's managing Japanese beetle today from an agronomic standpoint or economic pest, but they are a pain in the butt. And if you're trying to manage them in your garden at home, don't put up the pheromone traps because it just brings more in. I really like a little squirt of a poncho or a clothianum or gaucho, and that's how we keep our ornamentals safe from Japanese beetles in any given year. But yeah. Don't tell me.
No, we definitely have them on, like specifically they target raspberries here. It's a fairly occasionally strawberries, but I haven't ever seen them in corn, and they might be coming in beans as well. I think we've seen a few, but just never had like the huge population where it's an actual issue.
Yeah, no, and I mean, corn isn't that tasty for them, but yeah, if you're dealing with, yeah, the horticultural crops, there's, your sensitivity on stuff like that's a lot lower, and keeping your fruit quality high, is a whole different management process there. Nick, you had your hand up there for a second. Any comment from your standpoint? What you're seeing out with your customers?
Yeah, so we will see it on corn rotation. I don't think we've trained ourselves yet to realize what it is, especially on the producer side or the grower side. So I think it is important to try and rotate that crop through and think of other things that we can rotate other than just a traditional corn bean rotation. So if we can get a forage in there, or or a cereal, or whatever it's going to be, and go more to that Ontario model of a corn, bean, wheat rotation, that would be beneficial.
Yeah, for sure. And unlike European corn borer that we'll touch on next, with corn rootworm, it can be managed. There's one farmer, they're around, I don't know, they grow about 5,000 acres of corn. Every year they're up in that Listowel region. They have very large dairy herd, lots of pigs. And that was one of the first farms in Southern Ontario that was dealing with resistance issues. The first product inquiry call I went there was on Smart Stacks 4856. And yeah, the roots were essentially chewed right off. But working with that producer and their ag retail, they're now into a rotation where they've added dry beans into their rotation after their corn. So they've added another crop other than alfalfa. And they've been able to rotate through their acres and really significantly reduce that rootworm population in their neighborhood. And these guys are, I mean, they're a large Dutch dairy farm. They have a 48 and a 36-row corn planter, and don't like to slow down harvest of any kind, but they really saw the issues come up from a silage standpoint, where they were seeing the goosenecking and just weren't getting the yields and tonnage that they were used to. And that's really when they started paying attention. And when their custom applicator from a fungicide standpoint started calling them with their machine covered in beetles after an application, they knew that they were at a point where they had to manage it. And really in those areas, it's, again, from a neighborhood standpoint, you got to think about who's around, and if those beetles can bounce in between fields. But yeah, rotation is the simplest way. And typically you can get away with 2-3 years of corn, and then think about rotating off before those populations get built up too much. So cool. Anything else on rootworm before I turn it over to corn borer?
I think we're good. Adam, if you want to take it away.
Awesome. So European corn borer, and I've spoken to this group in the past, and really what I'm hoping to do today is provide a bit of clarity on what we've seen through our scouting program the last couple of years, and hopefully some folks on the call here have participated in that program, where we've been out proactively trying to find this pest and understand how far and wide it's distributed and what kind of damage it's causing in the fields. And really our initial focus was in the Maritimes, but we are expanding that into Ontario, Manitoba, and after a few more conversations this winter and a few more situations in Western Canada, we're likely going to expand to Saskatchewan and Alberta. But we spent most of our time in the Maritimes, and certainly that's where it started from. So just a bit of background to bring everybody up to speed. So Cry1F, which is the BT protein in the Pioneer above ground insect package, single trait package, Herculex, that was in the marketplace a number of years ago, I think right up until 2018, 2020 timeframe. The first population was found in Truro, so right in your backyard, in 2018. That same field was sampled again in 2022. after the COVID restrictions had lifted. And that same field also showed Cry1AB resistance. So it's a little bit technical, but Cry1F and Cry1AB are the two above ground proteins in the Pioneer AcreMax product. And that same population was screened against our protein, Cry1A105, which is in our VT Double Pro trait package, and it was also discovered or shown to be cross resistant. So essentially, Cry1F resistance confers resistance to our Double Pro trait, and also the Cry1AB resistance confers resistance to our part of our Double Pro trait, I should say. So that really leads to significant challenges when you think that all above ground insect trait packages in the marketplace may be compromised by European corn borer, which is really unfortunate, but it's the situation that we're in. And really, from that discovery, we initiated a proactive survey with AgCall. So they're a third-party service provider here in Canada, where we've had scouts go out, contact our customers that are growing Double Pro traded material from all seed brands in the marketplace. And really our goal the last 2 years has been to try and cover about 10% of the traded acres from our portfolio in the Maritimes. And you can see this map here on the right, a bit of a high level map on where we've spent our time, and I'll get more granular into the Maritimes here in a couple slides. So just a point of reference, from a trait transition standpoint, this orange line here is our old single traded yield guard corn borer product that was first launched in 2000, well, late 90s, I should say, early 2000s when we added in the Roundup Ready trait with it. But we were out of that trait in the Maritimes in 2015, and the darker brown line here is our VT Double Pro trait, which is our main trait in the marketplace. You can see that we had a very rapid adoption of that trait, and was really the dominant share in the Maritimes. So really the message here is we transitioned as fast as we could to multi-trait above ground products. And unfortunately, our competitors had a few good hybrids in the marketplace from a single trait standpoint that stayed in my opinion, far too long, and helped speed this evolution up. So in 2023, we surveyed 150 fields in the Maritimes, Manitoba, and also a little bit in Quebec. We found 24 fields that had European corn borer in refuge plants, but we didn't really find anything in traded material in 2023 until Sentinel plot with Jason Wells and Jocelyn Smith in Sussex, New Brunswick, where they did find some feeding in the Double Pro traded sweet corn variety Obsession 2, which was certainly concerning. We had Adrian Helder double back in that neighborhood. She's been our scout the last couple of years, and she was able to find one larva in one plant about 10 kilometers away from that Sussex Sentinel plot. So we knew that it wasn't just isolated to that Sentinel plot, that there was one case elsewhere, and we followed up and grabbed as many samples as we could later in August that year to understand what was going on. And then in 2024, we expanded our efforts in the Maritimes again, Manitoba, Quebec, where we found 53 fields with European corn borer feeding and refuge plants. 13 fields had some traded feeding and had some level of injury, and 21 larva samples were sent to the University of Guelph for further testing. Myself and a couple of colleagues from the US and our biotech group made a follow-up visit in September. We visited 8 fields, 5 Double Pro and 3 refuge or non-BT fields, where we collected insect larvae, did 30 plant destructive sampling. I'll show a few pictures of that, measuring tunnel length. And I would say all 5 Double Pro fields that we visited had a bit of feeding, and 2 of those fields we determined met their criteria for an unexpected injury submission to CFIA. So this is the first official report to CFIA from any company in the marketplace. One of those fields was in Sussex, New Brunswick again, and the other field was up near just northeast of Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. The last bullet point on this slide is, of all the plants that we scouted, we only found 4 surviving larvae in those traded plants. So 99+% of those larvae either die after feeding or back out and jump into a refuge plant. So the trait for the most part is still killing the pest, but there is more feeding that we're seeing, and I'll show you a couple pictures in the material than what we'd like to see. So just a map from 2023, and you can see green dots are fields that we didn't find any corn borer in the field at all, and then yellow is where we found it in refuge plants. And I would say with this pest, it is quite difficult to find until you get a trained eye. And the difference between 23 and 24, I think, is more driven on the training of the scouts and the experience of the scouts than the pest just blowing up naturally. So this is the map for 2024. The green pins again are fields that we didn't find any European corn borer in, and you can see a number of those in and around the Annapolis Valley here in the Truro region. The ones in yellow are fields that we found it in refuge plants, but not necessarily in traded material. The orange pins here, there's one in Prince Edward Island, a few here in New Brunswick, where we found some feeding really just on leaf material. Didn't find any tunneling within the stalk itself. And then you can see the red pins, that's where we found stalk tunneling in your classic European corn borer symptomology. And I would say of the fields that we scouted when we were out there and sampling, we scouted a number of, well, all the fields we scouted had feeding identified either in refuge or traded material from AgCall prior. But some of these yellow pins we scouted and we did find it in traded material. So it's of my opinion that this pest is certainly within this radius, I would say, impacting not necessarily every field, but to a high enough percentage that I think we can consider the challenge here to be fairly widespread throughout, you know, from Truro up through to Moncton, over to Fredericton. We didn't see much west of Fredericton, and certainly the Prince Edward Island region is fairly heavily infested from what we've seen. And it makes sense. I mean, if Truro was ground zero with your dominant winds pushing the wind-blown pests up to the north, it makes sense that this pest has spread up into Prince Edward Island. And the other comment I have is I think it is independent selection or selection within microclimates. And the reason for my comments there in that Sussex region, especially where you have a large valley with a river or stream in the bottom and hills that are not super large, but big enough that the insects can't fly up and over. I think we have a number of microclimates for this pest to develop independent populations. But again, with European corn borer, the pest can fly up to 50 kilometers, I believe, per generation. So it is a pest that I really attribute to more of a wind distributed pest. And I think that's really what we're seeing here is it's getting to a point where it's heavy enough pressure and enough insects around that have some tolerance to the traits, causing some feeding. So just to jump into a few pictures, this first slide here is a few different shots of a refuge field or a non-BT field in that Sussex region, just to give you an idea of how this pest can look under severe pressure in a field. And you can see the number of broken tassels, number of broken stalks. There was a bit of hail, I believe, in this field as well, but you know, there's lots of red stalks, there's lots of, again, broken tissue here. And this field in particular, when we went into it, you could find 1, 2, one or two or more larvae per plant. Really, every plant had larvae within it, and this producer certainly losing significant yield and also from a silage quality standpoint. Another slide here. This is from our double pro treated sweet corn in 2023, but you can see the number of pinholes in this stalk. Again, we destroyed the whole trial there. It was about 200 feet long, 10 feet wide, and we only recovered, I think, about 12 larvae. But again, you can see the little pinholes, and this is what we're seeing. And typically, we're finding them in the lower portion of the plant. I think with the amount of silage production, silage chopping out there, the pest has naturally evolved to migrating lower within that stalk to overwinter. So that's really, if you're doing some scouting after harvest, if you're looking in the lower stalk, what's left and into the crown, you can find these little pinholes, and that's classic visual symptoms of the pest. So just a couple of pictures of what we saw. I think this was in Prince Edward Island. The top picture here, the top half of this picture, this is all double pro traded material, and you can see each one of these dark areas is an area where we have some European corn borer feeding. Again, most 99+% of the larvae either died. We found dead carcasses within the plants, or they backed out and went somewhere else that was a little bit tastier. But again, that's a significant amount of feeding compared to a population that's totally susceptible. If you have a susceptible population, you'll find the odd nibble, maybe scared the outside of the plant, but you really shouldn't see tunneling to this degree here. And on the bottom here is just a couple non-traded plants, and you can see the extent of that tunneling really going from node to node, and causing some significant structural issues, and also from just an overall quality standpoint from a silage. And then you can see the gene check strips that we use. Anything here with 2 lines is double pro traded, and some of these fields we're finding over half of the plants we sampled to be traded material. So just a couple of closing thoughts here, and we'll open it up for Q&A, and I'm hoping we get quite a few questions on this one. So I'd say we're still observing broad trait efficacy, but we are finding pockets of concerning resistance profiles. And these bugs that we found this past fall are still going through the resistance profile screening through our lab in the US, and also the University of Guelph here at Ridgetown with Jocelyn Smith. We collected a significant number of larvae from a number of different fields. But again, we are killing the vast majority of them, but they're feeding more than they should be able to feed. Scouting for ECB is not an easy task, and if anybody's tried it, it takes a bit of time to get your eye accustomed to what you're looking for. Broken tassel, and the best time to scout is the second half of August, right through to harvest. But you're looking for broken tassels, you're looking for plants that have purple stems where the sugar flow is cut off, nutrient flow is cut off. You're looking for that classic frass or basically recycled poop in those leaf, where the leaf comes into the stalk. But again, it's something I think everybody should be spending some time on to understand what the pressure is like in your fields. We're going to efforts over further west into Manitoba, Quebec, and further. But really our focus now is how do we manage this from a landscape-wide standpoint, and hopefully, one question I had for you, Nick and Chloe, is just what the perception is in the market and what everybody has heard about this pest and the challenges of it. We're being very open with what we're finding, but not everybody in the marketplace is as open about it. And we're not admitting to failure, but we're trying to raise awareness and work with folks like Caitlin and Jason Wells really bring these findings to a broad audience and talk about management practices, and really management practice for European corn borer is doing what you can do to reduce their overwintering home, which is really, once they bore into that stock, they'll overwinter there. Anything you can do to shred that stock, incorporate it into the soil, just reduces their overwintering habitat. And there's been studies finding up to 3/4 of the plant or the larva getting killed in that situation. So I think it's really the conversation now is how do we adopt those agronomic practices on a broad scale to try and reduce the natural populations that are in and around the Maritimes and starting to pop up in other areas of the country. And just the last point here, we are planning to, and we'll make sure that everybody here has an invite, but we're planning to have a webinar focused on European corn borer, to share some of what I shared today, but also to get deeper into the biology and management on March 20 and 28th, from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Maritime's time. So look for those invites, and we'll certainly share it with folks at Agromart here, to share with all their customers across the Maritimes. So yeah, it's a challenging pest. I wish I had better news, but I think there is definitely management that we can do to slow it down. But the resistance profile is there. It is chewing more corn than it should be able to chew. And I think as time goes on and more selection pressure gets added to it, it's going to continue to increase in pressure, unless we start to run some other management practices into our operations to slow it down. So I'll stop there, Chloe, and open it up for questions.
No, that's great. Thanks, Adam. We did have one question in the chat. Is Bayer working on any biological control programs or parasitoids for this pest?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know it's been a broad topic of discussion in our Canadian Corn Pest Coalition meetings. We aren't working on anything from a European corn borer standpoint. I believe, and Tracy Bowdy from OMAFA is more of an expert in it, but I believe there is some biological control pests that can be adopted. I believe there's a supplier in Quebec, and in Quebec they may be doing a little bit of this for different pests, but yeah, from a biological control standpoint, I think there are options there. I think the cost and the logistics of getting them applied to a field and just how effective they are is still to be seen. I would say the main focus people should have is how do we shred those stalks. I know tillage in areas with heavy slopes and concerns about erosion isn't ideal, but at least running a flail mower through a field, if you're doing a grain corn harvest, can you run chopping corn reels with something to crush the rest of the plants like you got a devastator, stalk stompers, I think can lead to a significant reduction. But I think the populations in the Maritimes, with the density and commonness of silage harvest, have just adapted to, again, getting into that lower 12 inches of the stalk and into the crown to overwinter. And that's really what we need to focus on is shredding those apart to let the frost and freeze thaw process get to those larvae and kill them that way.
Perfect. And then just one more question. Environmental factors that would make kind of conditions more conducive for corn borer infestation.
Yeah, that's a good question. Similar to all insects, their development is very much driven on growing degree day accumulation. I would say that one of the biggest differences we found between 22 and 23, or sorry, 23 and 24 is just the stage of crop development. In 23, you guys were exceptionally cool and wet and really didn't seem like it was going to stop raining. And versus 24, where we had a fairly advanced crop, and that growing degree days and heat to really drive the development of the pest. You know, European corn borer will go through, you know, population spikes and drops similar to pretty much all insects in the environment. You know, one of the comments from our competitor on the last Canadian Corn Pest Coalition meeting was, you know, we don't think that corn borer had a big year in the Maritimes. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, our survey showed quite the opposite. And your Sentinel plots program isn't in the right areas and not broad enough to really find it. But yeah, I mean, if you have a harsh winter, again, if you crack those stalks open, freeze thaw, that can significantly reduce the populations. And we did speak with a farmer, and I'm hoping he'll be able to join us on our webinars, who I think he's been here for 2 or 3 years now, but he was farming in Germany. And when we visited his field, he kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, well, this, you know, there's really no pressure here to be concerned about. I said, well, this is traded material. We shouldn't be finding any feeding. He said, you know, back in Europe, well, the pictures I showed you there a few slides ago was very common. And he still here continues his stock shredding practice and tillage to manage that residue. And really, it was difficult to find the pest in his field. So I think what he's doing is helping to reduce it.
Just so I don't get in trouble, I haven't worked for Cornell since 2009.
Sorry.
I ran a research farm for about 9 or 10 years, and then since then I've been running a private consulting and research operation. I've moved out of New York. I'm in Tennessee, but I'm still I have a whole bunch of research at the University of Tennessee here, so I'm still going. Okay, now if I can get this to come back, right? All right, here I am. Okay, now ready to roll. Ready? You have the right screen?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. All right, we're going to look at the economic management and the impacts of economics and management on winter forage. Winter forage is something that I started working on 30 years ago, and it has taken a while to figure out a few of the bugs, but now we have it as a solid program, and it is expanding at an incredible rate, both in the US, in Canada, Ireland, Germany, Hungary. A lot of places have now realized the benefit of growing winter forages. Come on, what is this doing now? Hold on. All right, I got something jammed up here. Hang on a second.
Is it not moving forward for you?
Yeah,
Okay. Can you exit out of the presentation?
yep. If I can end show, let's start again. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Oh, come on. This is being a royal pain today. Let's try that. End slideshow. Oh. I just blew the whole thing off the screen. So you just
Okay.
have a picture of some sheep, right?
Yep. You just
Let's
can
get
maybe
back to
just
the real
open your
story.
presentation again. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry about that. And share screen. Let me go back here. Hang on a second. I need this to go to here. And then share screen.
Yeah. So we can still see your screen. Can you move
And
forward now?
this is the one I want. Here. See if that works. Got it?
Yep. I see the title slide again.
Okay, let's give it a try. Okay, it's working. Good. Okay. One of the things that really got me excited about working on these winter forages, as I said, we've been working on it for 30 years, figuring the ins and outs, is that it's a cover crop on steroids. You get all the soil and nutrient benefits, plus an immediate return on your checkbook in the milk production. If you look at this picture in the background, we are harvesting 3.5 to 4.5 tons of dry matter, and the leaves aren't on the trees yet. They're just coming out, and that's one of the earliest forages we can get off of this. Hang on, I gotta move this. Okay. All right. Okay. Oops, wrong screen. Hang on, I'm getting it here yet. Okay. When we put it into rotation, we reduce winter annuals, we reduce perennial weeds simply by competition. This stuff gets rolling in the fall. Nothing can keep up with it underneath. I tried planting it with clover underneath, and the only place the clover showed was where I didn't have any of the winter triticale. It completely controls this particulate and dissolved phosphorus losses. Particulate is when the soil is eroding away and taking that with it to the streams. Dissolved phosphorus leaches out the bottom. These roots are picking up nutrients as fast as they become available and running it into the plant so they're preserved over the winter. A big one is the nitrates in drainage waters. I don't know how it is up by you, but down here, they are beating up on the farmers because of perceived nitrates in drainage water. They blame them when in fact there's a lot of other sources that are doing it. But by growing a winter forage, you're reducing nitrates in drainage water. That's two things. First, you're cleaning up the water, and second, you're taking fertilizer you paid for, you put it on the field, and it's running out the field into the waterway. So you're losing money. It's literally money running out of your pocket. So both the phosphorus that you bought and paid for and the nitrate that you bought and paid for is picked up and put into the plant and stored there until the next year as you're harvesting the crop. And then finally, with this type of growth, there is little or no soil erosion over the winter because you have this cover. Now, how good that cover is depends on when you plant. And most of the data I'm going to show you is from the middle of New York, around Albany, New York. You're a little farther north, but we have a lot of farms up in Quebec and Ontario that are using winter forages very successfully. The earlier we plant, the more dry matter we produce in the fall. And the more dry matter we produce in the fall, the more nitrogen we take up. In some of our research plots here, we were picking up 120 to 160 pounds of nitrogen. You can do the math on what a pound of nitrogen costs, and you can figure out that you are saving an incredible amount of money by doing this. Majority of ours are in this range here, about 80 to 100 pounds of nitrogen is what we're saving in the plant that would have been lost over winter. Now, in addition to just saving the nutrients, it improves the soil structure and it helps the next crop. Corn grain increased yield 4 to 7%, and it may be an understatement on that number you'll see in a minute. Soybeans, the 3-year average increased 8 to 15%. Soybeans love to be no-till planted into triticale stubble. And surface permeability in clay soils. We have some real clay type soils down here. The surface permeability allowing air and water to move in and out increased 7-fold. So all of that improves the productivity of the soil. These fields are from Green Bay, Wisconsin. They are all lake-laid clay sediments. And this year, past year, while the rest of the United States was screaming dry in a drought, they had excessive water. It just would not stop raining here. And on the left side of the picture, there was no winter triticale crop. The corn started out about 6 inches tall, got to be maybe 5 feet tall and tasseled out and went back down again. This corn along the road here was about 4 feet tall and tasseled out because of the wet weather. Now, across the road, the same soil, the same weather, the same rainfall, but the ground had been planted each year into a winter triticale crop. That corn was 7 feet tall, very uniform, tasseled out, and instead of running around 13 tons to the acre, which the left side of the field was, it was running over 20 tons to the acre on the right side of the field. So simply growing winter forage crops does a real benefit for the crops that follow afterwards. Now, to grow this, you need to shorten up your corn season, because the #1 factor for increasing triticale yields is when did you plant it? When I first started on this, we would plant at beginning of October or around weed time, and oh, it's no big deal. It's like a cover crop. We'll put it in. Well, we found out that was absolutely wrong. The earlier you planted it, the more tillers, and you'll see this data in a minute. The more tillers, the more yield. So we shortened up the season corn. We went from 110-day to an 85-day corn, and we lost 3 tons of silage per acre in that shorter season corn. But we replaced it with 5 to 12 tons of winter triticale silage that actually had more milk producing ability in each ton than the corn it was replacing. So it increased the total yields 25 to 35%. In the Connecticut River Valley, which is in New England, I was talking to a consultant there, and the farms, this land is in high competition. It's the most diverse agriculture in any area of the United States. All kinds of vegetables and fruit and dairy is produced there. They used to grow 115-day corn. Now they grow 90-day corn, and they follow it with triticale. And he said now they have enough forage to go to a high forage feeding system, which increases their profitability. They're using all their manure in a very safe manner. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And their profitability has increased significantly by growing winter triticale in the diet. Now, the forage quality that we are producing, we made changes on when do you harvest this, and that is critical. The old idea is, oh, it's starting to head out. I guess we better go sharpen the mower and then clean out the silo, get the blower ready, and then in a week or so you start chopping and the heads are all out. That's garbage forage. It might be good enough for dry cows or heifers. It's not milk cow feed. Milk cow feed, produced right, harvest right, and we'll talk about that more. With the right nitrogen and sulfur fertilization, you're going to run 18 to 20% crude protein, not 12 or 15. And your digestibility is up equal or almost better than BMR corn. So it can produce very high milk in a high forage diet. And that's what we want, is high forage diets. When you have it in the rotation, it supports the high forage, high fresh cows and the high producing cows. It's a forage that farmers and nutritionists found it keeps the cows milking in the hot weather. When we get that summer slump and the cows start to go off production, I have a number of farms who will chop their winter triticale, put it in a silo, and leave it sealed until the heat starts to come on. The cows start to drop off. They switch out haylage for winter forage, winter triticale forage, and the summer slump disappears. Production goes right back up. Now, it's a different crop. You're planting it in the fall and you're harvesting it in the spring, which is completely backwards from most crops that we are growing. We can no-till directly into it. That's what that picture where the farm had 3 years of winter forage with corn. He no-tills into it. They use a clearing coulter like this to push aside the soil so that the allelopathic effect, which is a compound released by the winter forage and it stays in the top half inch of the ground, it reduces the growth. Well, it can knock out a lot of weeds, reduces the growth of the crops like grasses, corn, and sorghum that follow it, and so slows up their growth. But using this simple clearing coulter, clearing a half inch away, we get full corn out of it. Now, the only other question that we have, people that get started on this, and I'll cover this more later, is that the nitrogen they put on is insufficient. They're not used to real high yields of high protein forage, and they don't feed the crop. So it sucks every bit of nitrogen out, and when you plant the corn afterwards, it's slow to emerge and it's very yellow. So they found if they put some pop-up nitrogen right in with the seed, it eliminates the problem. The basic way of eliminating the problem is put enough nitrogen on to feed the winter forage crop, and you'll have some left over for the following corn crop. And you can also do it through manure. We'll talk about that more later. A big piece on this that we like is being able to rotate. We just showed you a rotation from winter forage into corn. The other rotation is from winter forage into a seeding, but we don't do the seeding at normal, real early time. We get our corn in, we get our haylage in, and then we come back and we put our seeding into the winter forage stubble. One farm had a field that he had put tile line in. They plowed it all up. They picked all the stone, put lime on it, fertilized it, and planted the alfalfa real early in April. They had another field across the road where they took the triticale off and then no-tilled their alfalfa. Well, in June, they got 3 to 4 inches of partly cloudy in about 15 minutes. That carefully manicured field with all the lime and the tile was completely destroyed. The seeding was washed right out of the field. There was gullies and stones all over the place, and right across the road was the nicest field of alfalfa you ever saw. And so he switched completely to planting all his seedings into winter triticale stubble because he gets better stands, no erosion, and few weeds. This works for alfalfa, it works for red clover, and it works for soybeans. They are all legumes, and they are not affected by allelopathy. The other piece is that stubble keeps the drying winds off of the surface, so it's moist right up to the surface. So when you have a plant that's an inch tall with an inch root underneath it, that top inch of soil dries out, then you have a plant that's dead. Whereas with the stubble, the wind can't get down to it, and the residue protects the surface, so the surface stays moist, and we get far superior alfalfa stands planting them no-till into winter triticale stubble. It reduces seeding risk, increases seeding year yield, because we're harvesting 3.5 to 4 tons of dry matter before we put the seeding in the ground even. It stops erosion loss, inhibits weeds, and it also moves your workload from early April, where the first nice day you're a week behind, second nice day you're 2 weeks behind. It moves that to June after your haylage is done. So it works very well to balance the workload. This farm in Western New York had a field that was triticale. Part of it, they rutted up a little bit because it was a wet spring. So he chisel plowed, disc, rolled, and seeded it. The other half of it, he simply came in with the no-till drill and no-tilled into the triticale stubble. And you can see the difference in the weed pressure, the annual weeds and other weeds of the no-tilled versus the chisel plowed, with the no-till being a far superior crop. Now, establishing a high yield winter forage. There are key steps that we found on this that make or break the crop. And we basically had to get rid of old ideas. And one of the ways we did this is we called it winter forage instead of winter cover. Winter cover crops, they toss it out there, and if it grows, it's good. If it doesn't, that's fine. This is not the way it is managed. It takes focused management. In your variety selection, your planting date is huge. Planting technique is very important. Fall fertilization is critical. And then you want to harvest it for quality. So let's look at some of these steps for success in it. First of all, we don't use rye. I know that disappoints a lot of people, but lodging is a major portion for rye. The upper left picture, anything more than 50 pounds of nitrogen, the rye was going flat. The bottom right picture, we went up to 200 pounds. It was a nitrogen trial, but we went up to 200 pounds and none of it fell over. It was the same field. You can see the rye in the right side of this picture. So you're better off using a triticale than a rye, and rye and wheat both fall in quality fast, whereas triticale loses quality at a slower rate. It gives you a slightly bigger harvest window. When you're planting, look at your planter. If you have these accordion tubes, take them off and throw them away. They do a garbage job planting. They catch and hold the seed, and dump it when it straightens out. We have moved all of ours to these sleeve tubes. There's a place there where you can order it. No, I get no kickback from Phil on selling these. I've never even met the guy. I've only called him to change the tubes on my drill when I was running the research farm. It makes a huge difference. It's like a coffee cup with the bottom cut out and slid inside of another coffee cup. They all move up and down straight, and it does a much superior job planting a uniform stand. In fact, singulating it using like an air drill, if any of you have air drills, singulating the seed compared to a drilled, it gave us 22% yield increase in a side-by-side trial. So planting it right is really important. The benefits you get from this crop that I rattled off in the beginning of the talk are accruing according to how much vegetation you produce in the fall. The picture on the left for the Albany, New York area was planted on time. The picture on the right side of it, the October 6th planting, was planted. Oh, this is when we always put it in the ground. Well, when you put it always in the ground, it doesn't work because you lose all the benefits. Here is when we plant wheat, and over here is where we're planting the triticale, the winter triticale. We're almost doubling the number of tillers. Doubling the number of tillers doubles the number of yield tons in the next spring. So we can increase the yield significantly. We went from 1.5 tons to 2 tons of dry matter up to 3.5 to 4 tons of dry matter by simply getting this planted on time. And on time is earlier than most people think. That's why we went to the slightly shorter season corn I showed you earlier. And on-time planting is going to also be ready sooner in the spring. On-time planting yielded 30% higher yield, and it was harvested a week earlier than the later planting. So if you want to get your corn in or get your manure injected into the ground, you need to get your triticale in early so it can come off early. Something I recommend on all plantings is you don't just buy any old seed and throw it in the ground because it's just like a cover crop. No, it isn't. It's just like your corn where you have special treatments to enhance the growth. We used a three-way seed treatment on the left here, no seed treatment for the same variety on the right. Those plots were planted within 5 minutes of each other. If we were planting on time, we had 15% more yield here. If we were planting late, we had 28% more yield than without any seed treatments. So we highly recommend a three-way seed treatment, like Dividend Extreme is one of them that is a three-way seed treatment. You have some up on your area. They use them on winter wheat all the time. So I highly recommend you use these. The other part is do not broadcast and disc it in. You wouldn't buy bin run corn from your neighbor, broadcast it on the field and disc it in and call it a crop. That would be the dumbest thing in the world. Yet we have people that buy the winter triticale from a neighbor out of their bin, broadcast it out, disc it in and say, oh, this is good. And then they complain and moan the next spring when they don't get a yield like I have been talking about. It needs to be the right seed, treated right and planted right in the ground, 1.25 inches deep, so that it can overwinter. It keeps the ground closer, and it'll overwinter. It won't heave out, and so you get a full crop the next year. The other piece we found is there are two fertilizer seasons. There's the fall fertilizing program, which you put on at planting time, and then there's the spring fertilizer program we put on early in the spring to boost the protein. What I found was that if we increase the amount of fertilizer on in the fall, this was planted in the fall with no fertilizer. And so we didn't increase our yield like we thought. As we added 30 pounds of nitrogen, we increased the amount of growth in the fall. As we added 60 pounds of nitrogen, we increased the growth in the fall. I'm sorry, this is fall and spring. This one back here is the yield in the spring with no fall nitrogen. This is the one, the yield in the spring with 30 pounds of fall nitrogen. This is with 60 pounds of fall nitrogen, 90 pounds of fall nitrogen, and 120 pounds of fall nitrogen. 60 pounds of nitrogen in the fall, nitrogen plus sulfur in the fall at planting time really increased our yield so that we got maximum yield in the spring. And now you're looking at this saying, well, you want me to put 60 pounds of nitrogen on in the fall, and here you're putting 90 or 120 pounds of nitrogen on in the spring. Well, guess what? This 3 tons of dry matter per acre at 20% crude protein, you are removing 205 pounds of nitrogen plus about 20 pounds of sulfur. It needs to be in there if you're going to take it off at a crop. 120 pounds of nitrogen in the spring with 60 in the fall. That's 180 pounds of nitrogen. You're still getting some nitrogen out of the soil. So fertilization is critical for maximizing this crop. And that 60 pounds you put on in the fall is taken up if you're planting on time. This is the on-time planting time. That 60 pounds of nitrogen is picked up and used in the plant. Plus it picks up any leftover nitrogen from the previous corn crop, the previous manure spread the previous spring. Now, when I first came out with this data, I had a number of people get on my case. They said, well, if we're growing this lush a crop with this nitrogen on in the fall, it's going to winter kill. Well, this is killed over the winter. It's not winter kill, it's killed over the winter. This was early planting, lush with 120 pounds of nitrogen. This was late planting, not lush, not a lot of vegetation with 120 pounds of nitrogen. And this is the planting, the cover crop planting, planting it late with no fall nitrogen. It all died, except it didn't die as bad here as it did in the other. The reason is over the winter, we had water lay on the field. And I don't know how flat your fields are up in your area. I believe you have some extensive flat ground. And you get snow on it, and then you get a thaw, and then the ground is still frozen, and the water pools on the field. This is 67 feet of sand and gravel, and the water was all puddled on the top. And wherever that is, snow mold disease comes into the field and does this. This was killed by snow mold. And this is patch right here, wherever this ice and snow was laying here, that was snow mold underneath, and it was dead. All of this other greened up fine for the winter. These are patches of snow mold for a susceptible variety. So as we did variety trials for many years, as soon as we saw this, that variety was yanked and tossed, and no more work was done on that variety because we don't want snow mold on it. These other varieties had more resistance to it. Now, if you have flat fields that have that water pooling, you can still get snow mold. What we found, and this is information that an individual in Canada sent me, is that if you spray these fields in the fall, as late as you can go before snow, with a spreader sticker with the liquid sulfur fertilizer, you will keep snow mold from forming. The Western New York Crop Management Association did the research for me, and you had a line in the field where there was a curve of snow mold, and then there was a straight line where the sprayer started spraying the sulfur with the spreader sticker. It completely wiped out snow mold. Now, here in the US, if I recommend sulfur for controlling snow mold, I would be arrested, I would be put in jail, I would be fined a real heavy fine for recommending a compound off-label. All right, the answer to anybody that comes in and gives you a hard time is you are simply fertilizing sulfur in the fall. There is nothing wrong with that. So tell them to take a hike. You are not controlling disease, you are fertilizing your crop with sulfur. It happens to control disease, but that's not their business. You are fertilizing it with sulfur. And sulfur is critical for this crop. We didn't get high protein until I realized every bit of nitrogen needs sulfur with it. Where I put 115 pounds of nitrogen down as urea, I got 12% crude protein. I only put 100 pounds of nitrogen down as ammonium sulfate. I got 17% crude protein. You need sulfur. We used to get it out of the polluted air. They've cleaned up the air. There is no sulfur now. So crops like this that we're getting protein out of, we need sulfur. For soybeans, for alfalfa, and other legumes, if you want to increase the protein, you better have sulfur with the nitrogen. What we use as a mix is 3/4 of a ton of urea with agrotane or agravol. That's an anti-volatilization. So when the urea hits the plant or the ground, it doesn't convert to ammonia and go off as a gas. It waits till the rain washes it in the ground. We mix that with 1/4 ton of ammonium sulfate. It gives us 38,006. And that has worked very well for us as a complete nitrogen sulfur feeding for our winter forage. Now, how much nitrogen? That took us a while to get this through our head, and even longer to get it through the farmer's head, that we are not growing 1.5 tons or 2 tons of dry matter. We are growing 3 to 4 tons of dry matter, and we have done that consistently. If you look at the change, this is 1 ton of dry matter, about 3 tons of silage, take 64 pounds of nitrogen up. As we get 2 tons, now we're at 128. As we get 3 tons, we're at 192. At 4 tons, which we can get in New York and we get in Pennsylvania, we remove 256 pounds of nitrogen. In the Ohio Valley, where they get 5 tons to the acre at flag leaf stage, that's 320 pounds. I have a research trial in now here in Tennessee, because Tennessee on winter triticale because we normally have a more open winter. We didn't have it this year. It was brutally cold and snowy, but normally we have a more open winter. And we get 6.5 tons of dry matter at flag leaf stage from winter triticale. That's like 18 tons of silage. So it picks up a huge amount of nitrogen. So as we started working on this with nitrogen trials, and I'll be reporting in my newsletter on our nitrogen trials we have in the ground right now. We had the idea, well, if we plow down nitrogen before we plant the triticale, would that carry us over enough to the next spring? Well, first of all, the answer is yes. We got no yield increase the next spring where we plowed down hog manure in the middle of September and immediately planted winter triticale. There was no difference in yield, but the 0 pounds of nitrogen was a yellow-green, the 120 pounds of nitrogen was blue-green. And when we took the samples, the 0 nitrogen in the spring was only 9% crude protein. The 120 pounds of nitrogen was 19% crude protein. That was like a 3-to-1 payback in savings in soybean meal by fertilizing the winter triticale with nitrogen and with sulfur. So that does make a difference. The other thing is we do not recommend, especially in your area where time is everything, we do not recommend spreading manure first and then planting your winter triticale forage. We don't want to mess with that. Both my research and Heather Karsten in Penn State, both of our researchers said the same thing. You are losing more in yield than you are gaining in savings in nitrogen. So do not wait to plant the crop to spread the nitrogen by spreading manure. We do not suggest top dressing manure on stands in the fall or spring. Repeat, we do not suggest top dressing manure on stands in the fall or the spring. We had some horrible, horrible results. One of the farms that did it, as they dug into the pile collapsed in a slimy, smelly, maggot-filled mess. But he was insisting on feeding it. His nutritionist says, don't feed it to the cows. They fed it to the cows. That whole group of cows got sick, and he killed 2 cows with hemorrhagic bowel syndrome. Do not do it. I have pictures, I didn't put it in here, of my neighbor when I was living up in New York, of manure he spread on in the fall. I had pictures in the spring as it was starting to really grow. It was 10 and 12 inches tall, and about 6 inches up into the vegetation was chunks of manure. Do not do it. What I do suggest is to use a rolling coulter injector, not a knife, not a knife with wings on it or anything like that. A simple rolling coulter. This is one of them. It runs at a slight angle. If you have stones in the field, you only want to run it at a 4-degree angle. You don't want to run it at a 6-degree angle. And if you have stones, watch your forward speed, because if you go too fast, it'll pop stones up out on the ground. But if you don't have stones, you can go a little faster. But we injected on a 16-inch center. No, it was a 17 or 18-inch center. We prefer a 16-inch center. And we had complete use of that manure. We came in the last Monday in November. If it's legal up where you are, you can go and spread this as late as the ground is not frozen. Even if you have an inch of snow, but the ground isn't frozen, go in and inject your manure. The ammonia stays in the soil because it is below 50 degrees, so it stays as ammonia. It does not leach out because it attaches to the soil particles, and it sinks into the soil. We spread 14,000 gallons at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The next morning, I looked at the slots, and there was only a little residue of organic matter. It all had sunk in to a clay soil. So these type of rolling coulters work very well. This is another one made by Zoki. It runs at a slight angle. So you only want 3 or 4 degree angle. And if it's stony, watch your forward speed that you don't pop stones up. And if you're still getting some up, we have taken a roller after we were done. We waited 24 hours for the manure to soak in, ran over the field with a roller, and all the stones were pushed back down again. This way you can put all the manure on for nitrogen the next spring. We are applying 12 to 15,000 gallons of manure per acre to meet the needs of the crop the next spring. It works very well, and it saves a lot of fertilizer cost, and it unloads your manure storage in November or December or late October for your area. It unloads the manure storage when the soil is below 50, and this way you can go into the winter with a whole lot more storage, but you're doing it in an environmentally sound method. Now, when we were doing some of this research, we planted early, but didn't put any manure on, no fertilizer, etc. The crude protein the next year went up as we added nitrogen. We were trying to get to around 18% crude protein. Where we pre-planted manure, that was put down and plowed in like I showed you before. We got a little higher protein, but still had to put a pile of nitrogen on to get it up to where we wanted it to be as a crude protein source. Where we put the manure on injected, we planted early and then injected manure late. We did not put nitrogen on as a starter, but we injected manure. Yes, we did. We did put some nitrogen on as a starter, I'm sorry. And we injected the manure late. We were getting the same crude protein at 60 pounds of nitrogen that they were getting at 120 pounds of nitrogen. And at 60 pounds of nitrogen in the spring, we could have eliminated that if we had, instead of putting 8,000 gallons down, if we had put 12,000 gallons of manure, we would not need that 60 pounds of spring nitrogen to get 19 to 20% crude protein. So you can unload your manure and save on nitrogen fertilizer using a rolling coulter injector. So to sum up the growing of this crop, in the fall, it's the number of tillers that gives you the yield potential the next year. And that is driven by planting date, fall nitrogen, and fall weather. And your management controls the planting date and the fall nitrogen. In the springtime, the yield you actually get, not the potential, but actually harvested, is the number of tillers that head out. And a large factor is spring available nitrogen, which again is driven by your management. I'll be a couple minutes over, Chloe, because we started late. All right, harvesting winter forage, triticale, and rye. The stage of growth has a bigger effect on forage quality than the species chosen. Quality goes down as yield goes up, and that crossing point is at stage 9 or flag leaf stage. This is stage 8. There is a leaf rolled up coming out yet. This is stage 9. The leaf is all the way out. Stage 8 was on a Thursday. Stage 9 was on a Tuesday. In that time frame, we had a 35% yield increase. So it does change rapidly over that time. But, and this is a huge but, if you have a couple nice days and it's sunny, nice, drying weather, and then it's going to rain for 4 or 5 days and you're at stage 8, take it. Take the crop. Bird in hand's worth 2 in the bush. Take your stage 8, you have high quality. If you wait to try to get stage 9, you're not going to be able to harvest it till the rain stop, and then you're at stage 10, which is dry cow and heifer feed. You just lost a lot of the forage. Now you can calculate some of this by simply looking at where the head is in the boot. When we split the head and we look at where it is, this is the tip of the head. These are the awns. The tip of the head is 4 inches down. That'll be about 3 or 4 days before it's at flag leaf stage. Before the flag leaf is ready, you can start harvesting. If it is warm weather, you only want to wait another day and then you want to start harvesting. If it's cold weather, you can wait probably 3 or 4 days before you start harvesting. And this you can see on this graph. In 2010, I had a very warm spring. It was a normal spring. Quality went down, measuring it as the digestion rate per hour inside the rumen. The rate went down pretty much a straight line. But 2013, it was very cold. It went down to just above freezing for 3 or 4 nights in a row. And this is stage 9 for the warm weather. This was stage 9 for the cool weather. It had higher digestibility and it held its quality longer than it did in the warmer weather. So up in your area, if you get real cold nights, it gives you a little bit bigger window to get this crop harvested. Because as one farmer found, he got so excited about growing this because it worked so well, he planted 450 acres of it and then had the stark realization on a day in May, he had 450 acres to get in one day. So then he switched to spreading his varieties out and his planting time out a little bit so he could get it in over time. But weather does make a difference on your maturity, and you can gauge that by simply looking at the weather forecast and then cutting the stem and looking to see where the head is. That high digestibility is critical. John Winchell did some work down in Pennsylvania comparing high quality alfalfa to high quality triticale, and the higher digestibility of the winter triticale was equal to 9.5 pounds more milk in every ton than if they were using alfalfa. That's why a number of farms are going to a triticale corn rotation. They grow a short season corn that they can plant it a little bit later in the spring, no-tilled into triticale stubble. They get it off in time to come back and no-till their triticale right back in behind the chopper so they can get it up and growing with nitrogen fertilizer applied in the fall. Now, and when you're harvesting this, this is a high sugar forage. It's 20% at harvest, and it's a high yielding forage. You'll get high yields of 6 to 14 tons. That's somewhere between 3.5, 4 tons of dry matter. Down here, we get even higher amounts in Tennessee. But you are getting, I guess the best way to say it is you are getting all 5 cuttings of alfalfa or 4 cuttings of alfalfa. You are getting it in one cutting. And you've got to change your management to get this dry. And we do this wide swath, same day haylage. This is research I did back in the 1990s, early 2000. What we found was the fastest drying in the plant was simply photosynthetic drying. When the sun is hitting the plant, it takes CO2 out of the air and water out of the plant in the leaf, and it makes carbohydrates as long as it's in the sunshine. If it's piled into a windrow or into lumps or overnight, it doesn't work. Now the overnight, if it's spread out and it's down to 30 degrees, down below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, you can convert that to Celsius. I can't do that real quick in a second. But anyway, real cold at night, then it stops all respiration and it holds the sugars overnight. That's the only exception to the rule. But otherwise, we want to get it to dry as fast as we can. It reduces the energy in the forage. And if it's in a swath, in a windrow or at night at above 45, 50 degrees, it's burning off those sugars. How well does this work? This was a farmer I was working with in central New York. This was alfalfa. It's not winter triticale, but the effect is the same. He mowed part of this field, complete wide swath. He mowed part of it into a narrow swath. That was at 11 o'clock in the morning. He mowed it. We looked at this at 2 o'clock, and he said this narrow swath, these swaths here are going to be ready to chop by tomorrow morning. This is at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the day of mowing. We walked over and looked at this. He picked up a couple handfuls, pulled out the phone and said, get the merger over here, get the chopper and trucks rolling. This is getting too dry. That's how fast it dried from 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock, using wide swath, no conditioning, uniform spread in the field. This is triticale being mowed with a conditioning mower and the lawyer, we call them lawyer shields on the back, deflecting it down. First of all, they have 2 shields in the front so you don't drive on the feed. That makes windrows that are not drying. They can sit there 3 or 4 days and they won't dry. They'll compost. It's compost drying you're doing. And it burns off all the sugars underneath it because it's not in the sun. Adding insult to injury, the stuff comes up, piles against those shields, drops on the ground, and makes these huge lumps. Every 24 to 36 inches, we were finding huge lumps in this field. So we made some changes. We put the shields up because there was no houses around to throw stones in it. And it laid the stuff out even. We opened up the shields, took all the deflector shields and discs, deflectors in the front of the mower, front of this tractor off, and we got full width spread, which dramatically increased the drying and eliminated those windrows that were composting. And if you look at the swath coming out the back, it laid it in a uniform, loose, porous swath. If you have a tow-behind machine, it's the same thing. Get that shield up. There are little shields in underneath. They're attached with a 9/16 inch bolt. Take those bolts off and take all the shields off so everything can just fly out and lay in a swath. Where we had the shield down, the swath was 8 inches thick. Where we had the shield up and it flying out loose and porous, it was 18 inches thick for the same dry matter material. So it dried a lot faster. This is the other factor I was talking about. If it's cold at night, you can hold it overnight and the respiration stops so it holds your energy. And there, here are your Celsius temperatures on this side. I did get it straight. I can do Celsius. The other part of this is just the sheer volume of what you're harvesting. Like I said, you're harvesting all 4 or 5 cuttings of alfalfa in one. Here's a first cutting alfalfa. Here's a low yield winter triticale. Here's the average winter triticale, and this is the high yield winter triticale. We have a lot of feed out there in one pass. So if we're putting it wide and not conditioned like I showed you, we still have such a thick layer that the bottom here is still staying green and it's compost drying, whereas the top is photosynthetic drying. So what we do is we wait about 2 hours. The top area will turn silver green. Underneath, it'll still be a bright bright green color instead of a silver green. First of all, we need that swath at least minimum of 80% of cutter bar width, like I showed you before. And secondly, we come in 2 hours after cutting with this heavy crop and we ted it. It speeds the drying. It brings those bottom rates up and throws them on the top. This is just a regular tedder. There are 2 tedders. One of them is a Pottinger. I can't remember the name of the other one, where they have short teeth in the front and long teeth as a second one, so they don't dig in the dirt and add ash and dirt to your forage. Vermeer makes one that I know several farmers who have it, and they all report it did a far superior job. They're hook teeth on the tines and run at the proper speed, not too fast. It grabs the top and throws it, then it grabs the bottom and throws it. And they said it made a huge difference in the drying rate by using those types of tethers that are on it. Now, problem we have is a loose nut at the steering wheel. They drive too fast, they go in like they're tedding, fourth cutting alfalfa, and they grab these chunks and pack them up on the tine and heave them out the back, and they don't dry. You've got to watch your forward speed, get off the tractor after you've gone 100 feet, go back and look and see what you are doing. You could spend a couple hours out there making a mess of the field and thinking you're getting something done. And then finally, the last two things, this tends to be a little bit wetter a feed, so we cut it an inch long, and you convert that to centimeters, I think it's 2.48 or something like that, centimeters. But an inch long length of cut. It reduces leachate, it holds the sugars. And then finally, use an inoculant. Here is a trial we ran with 2 different inoculants versus none. The difference in the final digestibility was equal to 2.3 pounds of milk. 2.3 pounds of milk is equal to 100 cows on a 305-day lactation, $23 a hundredweight, $16,000, simply by using an inoculant. And it drops the pH in matter of day to 3.8, 3.7, which keeps Clostridia and butyric from forming. I have never had Clostridia and butyric in my silage, even though it was wet, if I used an inoculant with the high sugar in the crop. So mow it wide, ted after 2 hours, chop it long, an inch, ensile the same day that it's mowed with a homolactic bacteria, and that high sugar allows full fermentation. Now, I usually try to get my information out in my newsletter. You can subscribe to that at my email. I don't charge for the newsletter, but I don't send it hard copy either. I've had a number of Amish people ask that, but they get a neighbor to get it and then they share it. But I'll put all my data in there. Some months I run out of month. It's like farming. I run out of month before I get my chores done. And so January didn't have an issue simply because I had so much going on. I'm still trying for the February issue. But you can subscribe to that and get the newsletter. And that's what I have.
Perfect. All right. Does anyone have any questions for Tom?
They're all asleep.
Yeah. No, that's a great presentation.
Yeah, Tom, that was really good. There was a lot of good information in there. So we're using an XTR branded winter Triticale currently. Do you see any other, varieties that we should be looking at for our area?
Okay, I have tested varieties from both sides of the border, and I don't know specifically the XTR variety. I will say, and I'll try to say this as delicately and non-politically as possible, but the Canadian varieties are highly susceptible to snow mold. Sorry, but that's what they are. They are importing varieties up your area. One that I would look at is Gainer, Gainer. It was also sold as Gainer 154, I think, but now it's sold as just Gainer. It is imported into Canada. They are growing it in Alberta. Seed production is in Canada. If you can't find anybody that carries it near you, give me a call. I can get you a phone number of the guy who would be responsible for getting seed up there. That's a variety is only a day after winter rye. So you get all the benefits of winter triticale, but you're harvesting early like winter rye. So Gainer has been a huge, huge popular variety. And when we had it as a numbered variety in the trials, it was really running circles around the others in high yield. If it's planted right, according to the date, if it's planted right depth and it's planted with fall nitrogen and seed treatment.
Oh, that's great. That's perfect.
Notice everything is linked together. I have to do it because I made the mistakes.
No, and that's why we want to get ahead of this. We have a lot of winter trailing that went in this fall, and I think there's going to be a lot more going in the future. And it seems we're still in our infancy. We're trying to figure out our nitrogen rates and how everything's going to work together. So it's great to have your information. Just on the diet for a second. So when you say a high forage diet, this, if we got into a 65% forage diet in our area, that would be considered a fairly high forage diet. Can we split that a 50-50 with corn silage in our diets?
Yeah, you don't have to feed all triticale. You can feed corn silage and triticale. And I got into a lot of trouble when I first came out with the high forage diets back in the late 90s. I was looking at some other research. I think I was doing the wide swath haylage thing. And I asked Dr. Chase, well, how much forage can we feed? I thought we had to feed 50% forage and 50% concentrate because I'm an agronomist. What do I know? So anyway, sorry, Charlie. But anyway, he said, he showed me a page, it's 124 in the dairy reference manual, and it showed the levels of forage feeding. And we found that we could feed 70% forage. Dr. Chase actually came out and visited a number of our farms that were 80-80 farms. 80% forage feeding, getting 80 pounds of milk. Now, most of our guys are 65 to 70. That seems to be where they fall, that if they're short on feed, they're okay. If they're longer on feed, they can bump it up to 70. You don't do this overnight. You could crash the cows. You got to move it up a little step at a time. It didn't go over well with some of the nutritionists, but they eventually all caught on. So that is standard procedure now in most of the states, at least the Northeast and North Central, is to use a diet that is at least 65% forage and preferably higher. And the interesting thing is the nutritionists found out they were selling the same amount of grain because the cows were milking so much higher, producing so much more milk, that a 65% forage diet was the same amount of grain they were using at a 50% forage diet with lower milk production. So they decided that maybe this isn't bad after all.
Yeah. No.
The vet bill went way down.
Yeah. Those are good things to strive towards. So that's
Yep.
great. It's a lot of great information. So thank you very much.
Mhm.